Hello, my name's Rob Edwards. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today we're going to be talking about Disney Plus's new Marvel show, Loki. I'm going to give you my general thoughts about the episode, the stuff that I liked, the stuff that didn't quite land for me. And I'm going to start spoiler-free, but I don't really have very much to say in the spoiler-free category. And then we'll go on and have a minute or two talking about things from a spoiler point of view. Sorry, I was aiming for the spoiler section. I do apologise. I'll be back in a moment. So let me start with non-spoilery stuff. This show picks up from Avengers Endgame. We see Loki, played by Tom Hiddleston, as ever, of course, on his further adventures. It's, I hope, not a spoiler to say that we're picking up here from Loki escaping from Avengers Endgame version of the Avengers movie where Loki is captured, and in Endgame he gets hold of the Tesseract again and teleports out, and we pick up pretty much straight up after that. So we're dealing with a Loki who hasn't had the growth of Loki in, well, anything after Avengers, really. So all the stuff that happens in Dark World, all the stuff that happens in Ragnarok, all the stuff that happens in Infinity War, none of that has happened for this Loki. So he is perhaps not quite as, I was going to say developed, but not quite as heroic. That's probably the word to go for. Not quite as heroic as I think Loki's path was taking him along in those other movies. Tom Hiddleston is brilliant. He is so charismatic. He really seems to enjoy chewing the scenery as Loki, and we get to see quite a lot of his reaction to the new concepts that he's introduced to, and how Loki deals with that. And I think that was some of the joy for this episode for me. We get to see some new elements brought in. I don't know how spoiler-free can spoiler-free be. Owen Wilson plays a new character who I like. He's something of a bureaucrat, something of a detective, and I think his role in this is going to be quite fun going forward as a sort of buddy cop, Loki and Mobius playing off each other. Should be good for the rest of the series. Get a shave. I'm already coming up against the problem of whether I can talk about things in spoiler or non-spoiler. So I'm going to move on to the spoiler section, but let me first of all just say that it's a good time. Of the 3 episode 1s that we've had for the Marvel shows so far, WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Loki, I think Loki is possibly vying for first place amongst my favourite of the 3. As I said in my one video I bothered recording about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it didn't really grab me. It wasn't a bad show. I watched it all, enjoyed it all, but I didn't feel particularly moved by it, certainly not to the point of wanting to make a video about it. Loki, on the other hand, I have a sneaking suspicion I may well be back in front of this camera before the end of this series to talk about Loki some more. It is a good time. I enjoyed it. It's worth your time if you are a member of Disney Plus. I mean, why haven't you watched it already, frankly? But it was fun. It was fun. Not perfect, but fun. Okay, let's talk about some spoilers. So, Owen Wilson's character Mobius works for the Time Variance Authority, and they are there to investigate branches in timelines to try and preserve the sacred timeline. The Time Variance Authority, it's an interesting concept. I really like it. It's from a corner of Marvel that I've never really experienced in the comics, so it's all pretty new to me. One thing which I found particularly odd about the TVA is that why is it not being a bigger force in the MCU? I can understand why, things like the Battle of New York, they wouldn't get involved in that. But when you've got an event where Thanos is destroying half of the universe, you would think there would be some effort by the TVA to put that right. I mean, if that was always supposed to happen, what sort of timeline is this sacred timeline? And it's also interesting to note that time travel itself is not a breach of the sacred timeline, because the Avengers were always supposed to time travel. And if that's the case, then the TVA must be okay with a certain amount of time travel, and what level of time travel doesn't create a branching reality, a variant of characters that they didn't decide to prune. I think it's very strange. I don't think we really get a sense of the danger that a variant timeline can represent. And I think there are two possibilities for that. Actually three possibilities. Either they will fail miserably and not show us that during this series, which would be a missed opportunity and really makes me worry about the Time Variance Authority existing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Or we might actually get, because we do have this variant Loki out there causing trouble, that we might actually see the consequence of a rogue timeline and its effect on the sacred timeline, and that might be enough to justify the fact they didn't act against Thanos because they're too busy dealing about the big stuff. Like, for example, why Doctor Strange didn't get involved in the Battle of New York, or the ancient one, I suppose, actually, because Doctor Strange didn't exist by that point. Simply, they have a higher calling, they have a more important thing that they need to be looking at. Or the third possibility, of course, is it's all going to be turned out to be a complete fabrication, a complete lie, a complete PR spin job by the timekeepers. I think there's a pretty reasonable chance that might be the way the show ends up going. So, as I said, Loki's brilliant, being trapped outside of his comfort zone where he can't access his magic, where he's confronted by his personality and questions his actions, where he gets to see what the prime Loki ended up doing on the way to dying, and really calling into question whether that was something that he should be doing, would have done, how he feels about the death of his mother and all that stuff. I thought the scene, or the extended scenes back and forth between Mobius and Loki about making Loki face up to his actions was the strongest part of this episode for me. Absolutely loved it. The two characters sat in a room talking. Very, very, very good. Really, really felt it. I know that a couple of people I've seen talk about how nothing really happens in this episode, or there's not enough action in here, or it all feels a bit like info dump upon info dump. And I think that there is an element of truth to all of that, but I think against that there is something of a masterclass of how to do info dumps, how to do backstory. I mean, the masterclass is apparently to have Tom Hiddleston being charismatic in the middle of it, so it's not something necessarily broadly applicable for the rest of us. But I think it handles it really well. I found that scene really engaging. I found it really interesting. There's a lot of sort of comedy about the ridiculousness of the bureaucracy of the Time Variance Authority. The whole ticket thing was a bit weird, sort of juxtaposed with how big a thing they do is. They have all this technology, all this power, all this self-imposed responsibility. And they have a drawer full of infinity gems. We have this huge, powerful organization that has a scope and a responsibility across the entire universe, the entire multiverse. But it comes down to printed copies that you have to hand sign about all the things you ever said in the world, or, clerks who are filing things away. We don't understand what the concept of a fish is. How would you not know what a fish is anyway? And all of this kind of stuff. Those two things put next to each other. There's comedy in there. It is a lot of fun. We see some of that power that the Time Variance Authority has. I will start reviewing it to TVA shortly. We see a lot of the things that the TVA is able to do, the technology they have. We don't really see an exploration of the potential of this stuff, but we do get sort of the first look at it. One question that I had about Variance and the TVA is whether the TVA automatically can spot a character, a person, as being a variant. If there were two in the same room, if the two people were in the same room, and they arrived to see what was going on, would they immediately be able to spot somehow that one was the prime version and one was the variant? I know they have their handheld widgety-gadgety things which they can scan people with, but if there are two people in the place and they don't scan them both, presumably they've got no way of knowing which is the real one and which is the variant one. And that does open up some interesting avenues for what we might explore and effects that we might see. So slowing Loki down to 1/16th time, or rewinding the character with the time turner thing. I don't think it's with time turner. This is all good stuff. And then we set up this idea, the ongoing plot at the end here, where Mobius has recruited this variant Loki to catch another version of Loki, another variant of Loki, presumably, since the Prime One is allegedly dead. Although we do have the sort of big question mark there about, who is the real Loki? Was the real Loki the one we've been watching for the last N movies? Was the real Loki off being mischievous somewhere? And this is always a copy anyway. There's all sorts of potential for all sorts of weirdness in there. And I think from the trailers, we've seen a couple of things which I suspect are different variations on Loki in different scenarios and different contexts. And it can be interesting how the TVA Loki is going to deal with all that, with or without Mobius's help. Also interesting, potentially, the kid that Mobius talks to, it's probably nobody. It's probably just a random person that Loki encountered and gave some bubblegum for some reason. But it could be that was Loki, because there is established in continuity a kid Loki variant. So it would be quite fun if Mobius didn't know that he'd actually already met Loki and could have stopped him potentially there, except of course then he would have been a different variant. Never mind. Interesting to note, of course, that at the end of the episode, the Loki variant that we only ever see hooded in silhouette, suggesting that there is a big reveal about that particular Loki still to come. Is it going to be the lady Loki, female Loki? Is it going to be... It's not going to be kid Loki, they were too tall. Is it going to be... one thought occurs, it could be a battle-scarred Loki who actually was murdered by Thanos and has somehow come back to life. That might be interesting if we've got a variant Loki going up against the resurrected Prime Loki. That might be really quite fun. There's a mystery here, and I'm here for it. I'm going to be in silhouette for this, right? Good. I think Tom Hiddleston deserves a show of his own because Loki is my favourite Marvel villain. I think the only real standout Marvel villain across the entire cinematic universe, possibly. Okay, Thanos. So I'm here for it. Loki is going to be a good watch, and I suspect I'll be back with another video about it sometime in the not too distant future. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time. Cheers.